We continue the series of self-paced videos within Module 1, Uncovering Your True Self and Purpose, with core beliefs. We were mentioning in the first video of the series that our guiding metaphor is the forest. So if personal values are like green leaves that gives us hope, energy, resources, context, shelter, support, and so much more, then the core beliefs are most of the times like that poisonous ivy which is strangling the trees within the forest. In small amounts, it's harmless and quite nice to see it climbing the trees. But when it takes over the whole trunk, it's harder to let go of it and become free again. Let's see how we can help with the untangling. So what we're going to cover in this second video is core beliefs. Going from what are core beliefs and how do they impact you, through how they look like, with 20 examples from my coaching experience, followed by how to identify the unhealthy and limiting beliefs and what to be aware of when it comes to beliefs. Then we will be switching towards an action-oriented approach, this time focused on identifying specific personal beliefs related to a setback you felt in your entrepreneurial approach, career, or personal life. For this, we will use three simple questions. Let's step again inside the forest. The same way that trees can be blocked, slowed down, or even crushed in their continuous growth towards the sky by parasite plants, which feed from them and weigh on their trunks like dead weight, the same way our lives, our goals, our effort can be hindered by our core beliefs, which weigh us down and make it harder to shake ourselves up. You might have guessed it then, what is a personal belief? Core beliefs are statements or sentences which express specific ideas that you hold as being true. These ideas are so strong they may end up feeling like unshakable facts of life. Core beliefs are actually the assumptions you make about yourself, about others, about the world, or about situations you come into contact with. They are built around your values and determine how you take in information and generally how you see the world around you. Belief statements can be positive or negative. For example, opportunities are all around me versus nothing good ever happens to me. They can be healthy, I'm a confident person, or unhealthy, I lack self-confidence. The way they are stated will shape how you currently feel about your life. This perceived truth are usually coming from personal experience, from the acceptance of social or cultural norms, or maybe from what others say or believe themselves. Personal beliefs are part of your internal dialogue and describe your approach in life. Your core beliefs, whether right or wrong, often are not your fault or doing. When you behave or you see the things over and over again throughout your life, you start to believe they are right and other beliefs are wrong. You might also inherit your core beliefs from your parents or other family members because that's the only reality you know. If you want to know which are some examples of core beliefs, I will show you what they look like from my experience as a coach. We've listed just a few of the most common core beliefs, be them positive or negative, such as I should help people in need. Giving is better than receiving. I must have a job and a regular paycheck. You can't build a family and be an entrepreneur. I'm not good enough. I can do anything I want. Good things happen when you make them happen. Opportunities are all around me. My hard work will pay off. I can change if I want to. We saw how core beliefs can look like. Considering how they can shape our perspective on life, it is vital to know what to be aware of when considering them. A potential belief sits with you until you accept it as a truth and adopt it as part of your individual belief system. The confirmation bias can actually push you towards finding evidence to support your own beliefs, be them true or not. If you identify your beliefs, you can start working towards challenging them. Often, to change your core beliefs, you need something drastic to happen. People don't believe something until they see it for themselves or have a deep emotional connection to something. But when it happens, if you change your core beliefs, you can change your entire life. Core beliefs are also the things that cause us to argue as human beings because we all have varying beliefs on different subjects. Each person evaluates and seeks sound reason or evidence for these potential beliefs in their own way. Once you accept a belief as a truth, you are willing to defend it up until the end. There is no person who is sheltered from experiencing core beliefs. They can hold you back, because they stop you from seeing other ways of interpreting the world. However, they can also be things that keep you on the right track. It's easy to get sucked into certain beliefs and thought patterns and lose perspective. These beliefs become so ingrained in you that you could only see things from one perspective. Because you spend most of your life following your core beliefs and values, it can be scary to open up to different ways of thinking and other experiences. Now that we know what core beliefs are and how they impact you, let's see how we could identify those limiting or unhealthy beliefs you might hold on to. Asking the following 5 questions will help you quickly identify if a particular belief is limiting or unhealthy. It's easier to remember them as the 5 fingers question. Is your belief always true? And I emphasize again the word always. Does it enable you to achieve your goals and objectives? Look at it rather if it enables or prevents you to achieve what you set to achieve. Does it enable you to resolve conflict and avoid mistakes? Look at it rather if it helps you solve or generates conflict. And remember, there are external and internal conflicts as well. Does it enable you to feel like you want to feel? And pay attention to this one, as you should already clearly know how you want to feel. Does it protect you and your well-being, with focus on your mental health? If you answered with no to more than 3 questions, it means you just identified one of your limiting beliefs. We'll show you in the next chapter, Overcoming Fears and Limiting Beliefs, how to address it in order to shake it a bit and make room for new perspectives. We now propose to you action number 2, how to identify specific core beliefs. Grab a pen and paper and write down these 3 questions to help identify one or more of your core beliefs. Then take this as food for thought and answer each one thoroughly in your working journal. How to identify specific core beliefs. First of all, identify which was your biggest setback in your career, in your personal life, or in your entrepreneurial activity. Think back to that situation and get ready to answer the following. Question 1. What do you tell yourself about yourself on that topic? Make sure to write down at least 3 sentences. To ensure you get current beliefs, base your answers on what you are telling yourself now about that topic. Question 2. What do you tell yourself about others on that topic? And know that others can be the other parties involved in that episode, your family, your friends, your co-workers, your managers, your neighbors, or just about anyone else. Again, write down at least 3 sentences. Question 3. What do you tell yourself about the topic itself? Write down the 3 sentences that come to you faster. This way you will have extracted at least 9 core beliefs, some of which could be unhealthy or limiting. But now you already know how to identify those, right? We end this video by saying, your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values become your destiny. This motivational quote by Mahatma Gandhi highlights the profound impact that core beliefs can have on shaping our lives. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of our beliefs, thoughts, words, actions, habits, values, and ultimately our destiny. It encourages us to be mindful of our beliefs as they lay the foundation for the way we perceive the world and the choices we make. By cultivating positive and empowering core beliefs, we can steer our lives in the direction we desire, creating a meaningful and purposeful journey.